Hi, welcome to the Deliverables. I'm your host, Ian Foley. Very lucky today to have the navigator Napa, Chief Executive Officer of Sharper Shape, Mr. Chris Beaufait. Thanks for joining us today, Chris.
It's my pleasure, Ian. Thanks for having me.
Chris, one of the first questions I want to ask you today is what are some of Sharper Shape's biggest projects that have led your company to the success it has had today?
Our biggest projects originated, as a company overall, we originated in Finland actually many years ago, 2013. So we've been doing these types, and I'll talk about that here in a second, of projects for 9 years now. But really, what put Sharper Shape on the map is when we came to California and started working with California utilities, particularly to capture very large area distribution circuits to help reduce the risk of wildfires. And it's from that time period that we captured more than 40,000 miles to date, over 5 petabytes of data, and more than 6 million assets, all of which are within the Sharper Shape digital twin, what we call core.
Excellent, Chris. Excellent. What here in California, we frequently deal with wildfires. 50% of those are attributed to power lines. How do drones aid utilities in reducing the risk of those events?
So I think there's many different answers to that question, actually.
Mhm.
When you look at drones allow us to go up and take a look at power lines without having to send somebody up the pole. So we can capture the data, we can see it utilizing visual capture, what we call RGB, capture of the assets. But the other thing that we can do with that is we can then digitize those and put those into a system, which we call core, which is cloud optimized remote evaluation. And that will allow a remote inspector to go and look at these things on a very large scale. And so that's some of the things that we can do is we can do visual inspection while keeping people out of harm's way, but we can also then do that at scale to allow people to work behind desks in a more comfortable environment to do better inspections of those assets and of that vegetation.
Excellent. You mentioned living digital twin. Chris, for those that are unfamiliar with that, can you tell us what a living digital twin is?
Yes, so we use the term living digital twin, and I'll talk to that and differentiate that a little bit from digital twin as well. Um, so um, when you go out and use helicopters, fixed wing aircraft, satellite, or drones to capture assets. Sometimes we're using LiDAR, sometimes we're using RGB, which is just visual images, UV and IR. So we bring together all of this data. The question is, how do you contextualize huge amounts of data when you're now flying or capturing data across many thousands of miles? And so what we'll do is we'll capture that, we'll digitize that, we'll create 3D models from that. And then from those 3D models, we can then look at many, many different factors. How close is vegetation? What is the state of those assets? We can do visual inspection. We can dispatch workers to actually go out and fix problems. And we can update it in real time. So when we talk about real-time updates, that's the living part of the digital twin. And we've
Mhm.
created an entire ecosystem that allows us to get a baseline and then update it in real time as the environment changes.
Okay. What can living digital twins answer currently in the future needs of utilities?
So a couple key items. First off, utilities have been doing business in a similar way for more than 100 years. And
Mhm.
so when you start to look at how do you migrate from some serious challenges that the utilities have today. So by and large, when we think about going out and inspecting either for maintenance or vegetation management or even just basic asset intelligence in the utility space, historically what it's been is men and women, line crew, in
Mhm.
trucks that would go out and inspect these assets. Well, like many industries, the utility sector is facing an aging workforce. It's facing a shortage of workforce. It has challenges with training in the workforce. And so, what we allow to have happen is to utilize technology to be able to go and capture at a scale that wouldn't otherwise be able to take place. And now you can take that experienced qualified electrical worker, you can capture his or her experience from, they might have decades of experience of inspecting these assets. You can allow them to extend their careers. They can actually work behind a computer while other people are going out with drones or helicopters and capturing this data. And you can now create a process which allows us to alleviate some of the real challenges that the utilities are facing today.
Excellent. How are drones combined with the living digital twin you just spoke about playing a role in data collection on the aging utility infrastructure itself?
Typically what we find is drones become a significant portion of what we'll call a detailed inspection. So we'll do broad area, and we and others in the industry will go and do broad area collections. There'll be collections via satellite, but the resolution's not super high, but it's getting better. There'll be fixed wing when you look at transmission. So transmission is how the power gets from where it's generated to the areas where it will be distributed. There's distribution, and that's how it basically gets from the transmission or substations to our homes. And each of those utilizes a different type of capture. When you get into distribution or specific structures within transmission, you want to get a much closer look up in detail of those assets. So you can do inspections of things like, clamps, insulators. You can look at things like corrosion. You can look at just cracks, defects, things that'll happen. And when you want to look at that detail level, a drone is great because you can get much closer to the asset. And today's drones have a much higher resolution of capture. And so drones become an integral part of the detailed inspection. So we like to think about it as, how do we capture the broad? How do we get a baseline of the entire system? And then as we go deeper, the drones really help us do that detailed inspection for looking for defects in the infrastructure, many different things that can happen through the life of just these assets, which can easily be more than 25 years.
Excellent. So again, let's stay on drones. So drones combined with the living digital twin, how are those helping utilities with the tighter safety regulations that they are facing today?
Yes. So when we go and create the digital twin, we like to say we're platform agnostic on the data input. When we look at that, what do I mean by that? We can use different sensors, some of those that are provided by Sharper Shape, some of those which are provided by the utility customer, some of those provided by service providers, whether they be drone service providers or even data collection services. And that industry is still growing. What we see is when we reflect that information, we want to be able to reflect that information in a highly contextual way for operators that don't require significant amounts of training. So in our case, our user interface can be utilized pretty much by anyone who's used a browser or a mobile device. And it's that drone capture information gives us detailed information that somebody can utilize from a web browser and see really up close those assets. We can also do that to some extent with our helicopter capture as well, because we're of the high resolution that we're utilizing when we capture these images. But by and large, the drones really become an integral part of a detailed inspection program for a utility. And it allows many departments within a utility. So it can be the asset intelligence responsibility, trying to understand where are their assets, what's the state of those assets. Vegetation management, how is the vegetation, the trees around these assets, around these conductors, are they creating a potential fire risk? It can be risk management. How does the utility think at scale about the risks that they have within their network? It also can be operations and maintenance. What's the state of those assets? Drones are really good for capturing that data. And then the last part of it, and many times, is the engineering department, who are really thinking about the engineering health of those assets. And so across all of those major categories in a utility, the combination of data capture, especially drones, when combined with a system that adds context, this digital twin or this living digital twin, that significantly changes how a utility can prioritize and manage their risk.
Okay. What what can utilities get the optimal value? What can they get optimal value using the living digital twins?
So a number of items that really come to mind when you look at what a utility has to manage. So a large utility can have literally hundreds of thousands of miles of transmission, distribution, power delivery across their network. The challenge when you think about a aging and shortage in the workforce means that how do you manage across that scale? And that scale is what the digital twin really helps with, because now instead of trying to manually track men and women going out in trucks and then utilizing sometimes still paper systems, or even where they might be collecting data but putting it in a file structure. The problem is we've all used Windows or Mac, and we've all stored files on a computer. The ability to contextualize those files can be very, very difficult unless you have a defined system for that. What our system does is it takes the latest geographic information tools. It takes all of the asset information. It takes all of the information surrounding those assets and adds that context. So if we want to look at, let's say, a specific distribution pole, when we click that distribution pole inside of the system, every picture that has been taken of that pole is automatically at the person's fingertips. Every observation within the area of that distribution pole, within the area of that conductor span, is available at somebody's fingertips in real time in a matter of seconds. So that is what really changes the information available for managing this sort of risk across large distributed assets.
Awesome. Excellent. Something that I've professionally have used, I'm a big fan of the core. Can you talk about the sharper core and how it applies with LDTs and data collection overall?
Absolutely. So Sharper Core actually stands for Cloud Optimized Remote Evaluation. And so what we've created is a ecosystem where we can try to bring the best from the industry to a utility's real world problems. And the real world problems that I'm referring to are things like that I've mentioned a couple times: asset intelligence, vegetation management, operations and maintenance, engineering, risk management. Those are real world problems at scale that every large utility has, and even small utilities. What Sharper Core allows us to do is aggregate huge amounts of data. We've done over 5 petabytes worth of data so far.
Wow.
It allows us to then take that data and put it at the fingertips of the operators, also the fingertips of risk management, of asset intelligence, even remote teams that are trying to bring information to the decision makers of the utility. And all of that is available at their fingertips. The other thing that Sharper Core has been designed is, because we've been in this industry for 9 years, we've done inspections ourselves. We've designed the user interfaces to allow for a flow which is highly efficient. And we've heard from particularly drone teams in the field that the use of core can save them 2 or 3 hours per day per team in the field. Because in the past, where a drone operator might say, I'm going to go take a picture of this distribution structure, let's say I took 20 pictures. That drone operator would label 20 pictures. This was taken from the northeast corridor. This was taken at this height. This was taken at this time and day, and so on and so forth. All of that is done automatically within the system. So when a drone pilot finishes their day, they go back, they hit the button, it uploads, they go get a beer or whatever their drink of choice may be. So
Right.
that's a real world example of how core helps both the utilities but also the people doing these visual inspections.
Excellent, excellent. You're definitely putting the D in deliverables today, Chris. I do appreciate the knowledge that you've been dropping. I have one more question for you today. What ways do you see drones playing a role in climate change initiatives?
It's a really good question. I think ultimately, I like to think about the combination of drones, aerial inspection, better intelligence tools as really helping us mitigate the consequences of climate change. And so, in particular, this past year we're living through a 1,200-year drought. It's hit at least a dozen of the western states in the U.S., but quite frankly, not just in the United States. We've seen it in Australia, we've seen it in Europe. We've seen a widespread spread impact of the effects of climate change. And so, as the areas in which we operate, and we need to continue to operate because we all want electrons to our home to power all of our goods, right?
Mhm.
As that drought, as that dryness continues, as that heat continues, that creates, unfortunately, a perfect storm for things like wildfires that we've seen. But it's not only wildfires, it's also the fact that just extremes in weather, whether it be typhoons, whether it be tornadoes, whether it be cold weather like we saw in Texas, these weather extremes have to be managed. And the fact that we can utilize drones and helicopters and fixed wing aircraft, and we can contextualize all of that information to allow us to better prioritize how we spend our limited resources to ensure the maintenance and the health and the reliability and the resiliency of our power grids. I think that's how one example of where drones, but also the entire ecosystem can help. And then, of course, we're just really scratching the surface because we're talking about utilities. But when you think about critical infrastructure in general, we've seen bridges fail. Well, drones can be utilized in bridge inspections. We've seen the rollout of 5G telecom. As that rolls out, we also need to think about that network and how do we protect that network. So, what I like to think about both drones, aerial inspection, satellite inspection, the ability to aggregate that data is how we truly think about, are we mitigating the risk that we're seeing with the environments in which we operate?
Excellent. A lot of knowledge. Thank you very much, Chris, for coming on. I really wish when I started in the industry years ago that I had that type of information and knowledge available to me. So thanks for coming on and sharing. And hopefully, I'll see you again soon, sir.
Great. Well, thank you much, Ian. It's a pleasure to be here, and I know we'll be in touch. So take care.
Excellent. Thanks, Chris.